Your heart is free. Have the courage to follow her.
All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
What we do in life, it goes in eternity.
No retreat. No surrender.
All right, so the main topic of today is we're going to be talking about if the Bible is true. We're kind of be just on like a base level, and we can go into more detail later down the line if that's wanted or if we feel like it's needed or anything. We just want to try to keep it real basic. We don't want to turn anyone off, like, worrying about stuff that's too in depth or, whatever the case is. So we're just going to try to present the basic facts.
Not only is the Bible real, but the most Christianity as a whole hinges on Jesus dying and then being resurrected from the dead. So we're going to prove a little bit of that as well. Hopefully, hopefully it comes across us.
Hopefully we'll convince y'all.
Yeah.
This time. And I moved this section. It was near the bottom, so I moved it up to the top because I feel like that this is very important. Did Jesus really die? Is the first point of discussion, right?
Right.
So the first point that is, I guess, to be talked about is in his crucifixion. It was a multi-step process. It's not just they kill you within a second. It's like a whole punishment because at the time these were really bad people that were getting crucified and Jesus. So it was for like the worst.
It was a death for criminals, basically.
Yeah, and everyone is pretty much agreed upon that Jesus was a real person. That fact is known. They just a lot of times will disagree on what was his role. But we're here to try to say that he was the Savior and he died for all of our sins. He rose up from the dead on the third day. And that's why we are given the gift to, even though we're being sinners, we still get to be considered holy. To be considered holy, that kind of has a shock factor because you're like, well, I'm just me. But actually, we're considered children of God. We're considered heirs to his kingdom, which is everything. And all you have to do is just accept the gift that he gave us in taking our sin away. So that way we could be considered to be holy.
Right.
That's pretty much it. And it's a gift. And I think a lot of people have trouble comprehending that because they're like, used to different human standards. And they're like, well, I may not qualify or whatever. But God isn't human. That's an important point to remember. So his love and everything is not human love. It goes further than even like a mother's love for her kids, how much that he loves all of us as his creation. So that's real important too. When you think of God, you think of him giving us this free, awesome gift. You have to think of him as a deity, a God of love, because it says God is love, and that's why he does it. It's not like a human giving you something and there has to be like strings attached or anything like that. It's just simply out of love, and it's just a gift that we don't deserve. So I feel like that's important too. But anyway, like I said, or like we said, it all hinges on him dying and resurrecting. It's pretty easy for anyone to die, but he had to also resurrect. So we're going to first prove that he died, because I guess some people don't think that he did, or that's kind of debated upon. But just from a physical standpoint, there's a lot of good evidence. You want to start, or you want me to start?
I'll go ahead and start. All right. So for him dying, okay, so we'll take Jesus died on the cross, as everyone knows. It's symbolic. Every time you pass by a Christian church, there's a cross on it because that's what it's all about, baby. Flogging.
You probably remember that.
For sure.
It's pretty bad. Like I said, we're gonna stick to physical, and flogging was pretty dang bad. You probably have more notes on that than I do because I only have a page.
Well, for flogging, okay, not even like the act of whipping, but from the very basic, what is in the whip of the, I don't know if it's called a flog or not. I don't think so. But like the whip that they flogged.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Anyway, the whip that they flogged with, it had made out of leather handle. But on the tips, which made it very unique, the tips of the whip there was a bunch of strains coming down from the whip, and the whip was entailed with bones and metal shards. So, and whenever you hit someone with a whip that has bones and metal shards, that does some damage. Not only does it tear up skin, but it tears up bones as well, and causes extreme bleeding. I'll let you touch up on that because you're more in tune with the body. 'Cause he's
whatever that means.
well, because you are a certified personal
you for
trainer,
that.
so he's done some study in the art of anatomy.
AP, kines.
Mm.
Did a little bit, but it's not really too important. But it is, notable just to understand what happened was that there's everyone knows, especially that works out, that the back is a big muscle group. So the flogging was usually on the back area, so that also could be your legs. And the main muscles that you use to stand up are called your erector muscles, and they run along your spine, and they kind of like those things that stick out a little bit past your spine if you look at someone's back. And those have a lot of blood pumping through them constantly because they're keeping you erect. And so those would obviously get torn up, and that's going to cause a vast amount of blood loss. Depending on where else you have your lats right there, which is a little less on the back, more on the side, but they could have definitely probably did get hit, and those are pretty big on most men, especially. Your QL is your lower back, so there's a lot of meat. And if you touch on like your glutes, which is like your butt muscles and your hamstrings and stuff like that, those are all big muscles that receive a lot of blood, and they constantly are pumping blood. And especially if anyone who works out knows when you get a pump or you get blood flowing through those muscles, it's going there to try to help the muscle work harder to lift the weight. And in which case he's carrying the cross that was part of the punishment up a mountain. So that's gonna take walking, supporting the weight on your back.
Which was after the flogging. They
This
made
is
him
after.
carry the cross across the town to
Right.
his final destination where they put him on the cross.
Right. And yeah, just that the muscles being open wounds and constantly bleeding out. Even if he was sedentary after that point, definitely probably would have bled out. But on top of that, getting the pump and getting all the blood then coming out definitely would lend to bleeding out at some point. But
That is why he collapsed he collapsed and they had someone help him because there's no way that a human could possibly get flogged and then have to
Yeah.
carry probably a 50-pound, probably more.
probably more.
Yeah.
Depending on if the wood was
At
solid
least
and
50
conditions
pounds.
and everything. But yeah, at least 50 pounds.
Wooden cross a town. No short distance. It was a town. So
Yep, and then uphill.
uphill, rocky. He was only probably wearing sandals. He probably wasn't wearing anything, honestly.
Yeah, they
So-
weren't real developed in footwear yet.
No Nike Jordans, unfortunately.
Yeah, so basically that would have definitely meant that he was gonna die at some point, but that's not actually what is believed to have killed him. But that definitely would have been one thing that would have killed him in the near future for sure. But it lends to the next one, which is the asphyxiation.
Well, asphyxiation is first whenever he was on the cross, how they knew it was asphyxiation is because whenever they stabbed him in the womb to confirm that he was dead, blood and water mix came out of his stomach or side of his stomach between the ribs, and that is a property of asphyxiation. I'm not sure what else could cause that water, but
Yeah,
that's
I think
definitely
that's the only thing.
yeah, maybe.
That's from what we read. We'll double check, and you want to start saying it? We'll link it.
We'll link it. Yeah.
But from what research we did, the only thing, from what I heard was asphyxiation can only cause that, and it's called pericardial. Oh yeah, pericardial effusion. If you want to look it up. And basically, yeah, it's when your water and blood mixes, hence the cardial and hence the effusion. And it can't be faked either, because I guess that people thought for some reason he would have faked it.
Such an extreme condition that there's no way.
Right. And on top of that, the Romans at this point were conquering, or they had conquered a lot, including Greece, and all the warriors were essentially like trained killers. They have been, they've seen action. They're used to killing people, seeing people die constantly, and they were in charge of these prisoners, and they weren't allowed to let them escape. So if they did escape, the soldier himself would be executed. In other words, they were making sure that these guys were in fact dead, because if it was your life on the line, you're gonna make sure
get the
that,
job done.
yeah, you're gonna make sure you're dead. So yeah, all those factors convince us that he's dead, and that's probably more region due, and we'll just try to link that when we look up that pericardial effusion. But in a nutshell, that's the physical aspect of why we believe that he definitely died, and that standalone, I guess, is not really too convincing as far as the whole grand picture of God.
All right, yeah, that's just like anyone can believe someone died.
Yeah.
It's convincing people that he's actually rose from the dead. That's the hard part.
Right. And basically, I just put on here, Jesus resurrected from the dead with the question mark, because if not, Christianity is fake. So now this is talking about the resurrection specifically. And the first point is the 500 eyewitnesses that gave separate accounts, and not even all of them were not even Christians. But at the time, shortly following, they all gave accounts that they saw Jesus alive and fine and walking around and everything. And I'm pretty sure we'll try to find it, but I'm pretty sure that that'll be well known too among the historians and everything, as far as information wise. Now that brings us to the point of, well, were they maybe confused or something? And I know you kind of learned a little bit about that.
Well, the argument is that mass hallucination was the result of the 500 eyewitnesses, but there's no evidence of mass hallucination at all. You're lucky to even get 3 people hallucinating the same thing. I don't care what kind of drugs you're on. Y'all aren't gonna see the same thing.
Did you have anything else about that? Just that.
Yeah, just that.
About just about the eyewitnesses. Did you have any following notes? I only had how many there were.
Well, the eyewitnesses accounts. If that's how the documents came about. There's documents of each witness stating that they did see Jesus after the crucifixion, and how you know that they're reliable is to compare and contrast the documents to prove that it is reliable, which is called textual criticism.
Oh yeah, I have that.
Yeah. So the more documents you have, to compare with from the original, the more you get your story, and the sooner the documents were made, the more accurately portrayed, because over time, it gets lost and the details get lost. So
yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And then there was I have 5,843 copies of the Bible made, and that was kind of a short time for all those to get made. I'm not sure. Do you know if that includes the Old Testament?
No, this is all New Testament.
Okay.
500.
So 5,000. I mean, that just for that to kind of get spurred into action, something crazy would have had to happen, because at the time of this happening, there was the Iliad, which was the Greeks' holy text, essentially.
Right.
And they only had about 500 copies of that, 500 plus at the most. And they were pretty well established. Jesus just came and, he was, he was new, I guess, but we know he wasn't. But to them, it was just like, well, he's Jesus, he's doing this stuff. but they already had all their gods and everything. It was Homer's Iliad, and they had these books, and they only had about 500 plus copies that made it um, out of that time period. Um, and they also had philosophers. So if you have any philosophy, Aristotle and Plato, and they only had seven that made it past there of Plato's workings. I guess his
And these guys were big back then. They were like,
they're like celebrities probably.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
there wasn't
probably.
much to be a celebrity.
They're like the
for.
Einsteins back in like
Yeah,
ancient days.
yeah.
You know,
'Cause,
everyone
I
knew
mean-
that these guys were smart and on like the new level.
Yeah.
So to have only, you know, less than 5 copies of Aristotle
Of
you
any
know,
of his stuff.
yeah. At least that found, you know, at least found.
Yeah.
There probably were more, but I wouldn't count on like a bunch
Yeah.
more. You know.
And too, I want to make sure that we say, as Christians too, this might help some people. It may not, because it's speculation, but it's based on faith. That the reason that so many Bibles and the story of Jesus came through was actually by divine intervention of God protecting it, so that way that we can make sure that we got all of the accounts 100% right.
Right.
Again, that takes faith to believe that, but I definitely think as a Christian that the evidence would support that, but the evidence doesn't support that 100%. So it takes faith. But I just wanted to link that in there for sure. Alrighty, well, that is the evidence for his resurrection up to the next.
Yeah. To
What do you have any more?
empty
That's all I
empty
have.
of the tomb.
Oh yeah, that's very important too.
Yeah.
But I didn't have any notes about that. So
Okay. Well,
Ethan.
so in Jewish culture, you know, well, I'm pretty sure even back then, not even in Jewish culture, you know, back then, women weren't held so highly.
This is good stuff.
Yeah, very good stuff. You know how much I hate women. Yeah, okay. Anyway, all right. So,
So
so
like a little
so-
second from it. Like hate women. Like move to the next thing quick.
so the okay. So in the Jewish culture, and even like back then in ancient times, women weren't highly regarded, and they were considered, you know. So if women saw,
Oh wait, cut.
all right, so women weren't highly regarded. And so basically, if they saw a crime, you know, they might as well have just kept their mouth shut, you know, because and nobody's gonna believe them.
Fun fact: if you don't believe this, just look at the modern Middle East, like Saudi
Exactly.
Arabia. It's not really a joke though.
Oh, not at all. So if they reported anything, nobody's gonna take them seriously. And so basically, in the Bible, there were women that discovered the empty tomb.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the ones that went and told the apostles, the disciples. And so, you know, and so if a Christian, so if this was just like a Looney Tunes story, people just made it up, you know, they wouldn't have put women as the founders of the empty tomb. All right, next.
Next is more evidence, but it's not I don't know how to say it, like directly of his physical death. It's following his death, events that happened.
It's more along the line of like why Christianity's widespread now, you know.
Right.
More along the line those lines.
Yeah. And it's trying to convince skeptics. And skepticism is great because there's a lot of things that it gets us. Being able to talk, you know, as you can see, we definitely believe in the Constitution, and that's a good thing.
Right.
And the First Amendment is, you know, freedom of speech, and that means that people can talk and be skeptical. And a lot of times that has benefited us, like the Revolutionary War, where they were skeptical of being taxed for tea.
Right.
So they started the revolution. Which, yeah, but you know, at least a lot of good things. And now we have America, which is the melting pot. It's gave a bunch of people chances that they would never have because of those decisions. So
Right.
skepticism is a great thing, and we're going to try to convince skeptics by starting with the biggest skeptic at the time, who not only had a spiritual obligation to be skeptical, but he also had a physical reason
Title.
as well. Yeah, title and reason. So that was Paul. In case you didn't know, Paul Tarsus. Everyone knows that he was a real person. You can look it up on Wikipedia or a more trusted site if you would like to.
Hey, I donated $3 to Wikipedia.
Yeah, that message.
I'm gonna put on my hat.
Oh, we're getting serious now, folk.
Okay, so the conversion of Saul to Paul.
Yes, thank you for
Amen,
restating where I was. Thank you.
There we go.
That's how
Go
you have
for
to answer it. Thank you.
There we go, baby. So Saul, has an encounter with Jesus, and so before the encounter, he was a Pharisee, and I'll let Josh touch up on that. But basically,
Yep.
he was a bad
Jewish
dude.
Pharisee.
Yep. He slaughtered a bunch of Christians.
But there's a good point to say where bad is relative. So he thought he was a good dude,
Right.
slaughtering Christians
Even
because he thought they were
too?
heathens.
Right.
And he thought they were doing blasphemy against the God of Moses because they didn't believe that Jesus was a savior.
Right.
So in his mind, he was a good dude, but he was actually being a bad dude. And I think that because of his intent was good, that God said, well, if Saul knew perfectly well that God was Jesus was his son, and he was still, then he would have been a bad dude. But he thought because he had been a Pharisee, he had basically been conditioned, and we're going to talk about cultural conditioning and social conditioning and conditioning from as a youth. We're going to talk about that in another video. But basically, he had been conditioned as a kid, growing up a Jewish boy and getting educated to become a Pharisee. And Pharisees, they learn within 15 years, I think. This is where I'll do the Pastor Ed from our church, Community Bible Church. He said this. So if it's wrong, you can go look them up and tell them what you think. But basically, since as a teenager, they knew all the books of the Old Testament word for word in the true Hebrew.
Yeah, and they would each year. It's like the tradition. They would recite the Old Testament. So.
The whole thing. So you can open it up, crack it open, and you can see if that'd be something that you would do it. And Pastor Ed also said that in the Bible, and this is definitely just me quoting him, but God says that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, then your righteousness won't get you into heaven, essentially. So, in other words, if you're not being as religious as them, but even more so, then there's no possible way for you to get to heaven besides through Jesus. And I hope that doesn't seem open-ended to where it's like, oh, well, there's a chance. There's no possible way for people to do it. The only way, and God says this too, I know for sure.
Even Jesus called the Pharisees hypocrites. So
Yeah. So
gotta be one good man.
yeah, and that's why God says you have to pass them, and I think it means pass them by a lot. In other words, you can't do it. Like I said, it's not. It sounds open-ended. It's not open-ended. It's not possible.
And yeah, I think he meant that
Humanly
to,
possible. Jesus.
Either you could do it through works or just say, hey, I'm a screw up. I'm a sinner. Accept Jesus into your life. That's what he wasn't coming for. He was coming for the saws. The ones who, even though they thought they were doing right, even though they're just murdering Christians, he came for them as well.
And there's a lot of people like that nowadays because they think now we have more science and technology, and a lot of people think that they understand the world and that they can say definitively, and we're going to touch on this in future videos talking about what science gets wrong, but they believe that because we know so much about science and don't factor how much we don't know, that they can say definitively that there's not a God. But the thing is that there's so much stuff we don't know. That's like saying how the whole puzzle looks, but you only have 3 pieces of it because we don't know so many things. We speculate on so much stuff. So, and the Bible talks about that too. Not to mention where it says that, in the future their knowledge will increase, and also that because of their earthly wisdom that they'll actually become fools. We'll get the exact verse and quote it for you, but it talks about all this stuff happening, and you do see it happening. And it's been happening for the last 20, 30 years, especially because after computers came out, there was so much computing power that technology has ramped up tenfold, which, like I said, the Bible talks about. So, basically, I don't know how that ties back in.
All right.
But
We're going to get done with Paul.
It ties back in somehow. You can rewind the video to see.
We'll
And
link it.
let's just we'll link the time. So if you want to read the exact encounter, it's Acts 9
Just
through
skip ahead if you already know it.
yeah. It's probably like 30 seconds. See how fast I can read, but I think it's Acts 9 1 through 10, where he gets to yeah. So now Saul still breathing threats at murder against the disciples of the Lord. So that tells you where he was at. He's saying to himself basically how bad he wants to kill the disciples. So that's not a good spot to be in. If you're doing that, then you don't want to do that.
Right.
uh, he went to the high priest, so this is a Pharisee, and asked for letters from him to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belongings to the way, both men and women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. As he was traveling, it happened that he was approaching Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. So I envisioned that maybe like lightning, but it was definitely something crazy. Um, so the light from heaven flashed around him. He's on his horse, and then he falls to the ground, um, and heard a voice saying to him, and this God talking, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And then he says, who are you, Lord? So he knows that this is divine entity, obviously. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, but get up and enter the city, and it will be told you what you must do. And then the men who traveled with him, with Saul, who stood speechless, hearing the voice but seeing no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. And leading him by the hand, they brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drank. And then,
How many Pharisees were there? Or they're traveling in a group, right?
yeah,
And who asked? Who are you, Lord?
oh, Paul asked that.
It was Paul.
Yeah, or Saul.
Saul.
Saul or Paul, but it's the same guy.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, so he asks you, who are you, Lord? So immediately he's like, okay. And so I read that. I know you're in the middle of talking, but I wanted to read
No worries.
the direct transcription.
Right. If you want to go more in depth, you definitely read the whole book. It's
X9.
it's fascinating stuff. All right. So basically,
X9.
now that Jesus so now that Saul had his encounter, I'm sure along the lines after his whole conversion, that's whenever Jesus gave him a new name, Paul.
Right.
And so now he's basically like the number one at the time advocate for Christianity. He wrote how many books of the New Testament?
I believe it's 13. We'll double check
13,
that.
right.
And if it's wrong, we'll just cut it.
Now, I guess the whole theme though is that he went from prosecutor to apostle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for him to abandon all his religion, all of his childhood, for that,
I like
for Jesus.
to bring it back to the viewer. What's something you believe in like 100%, even if it's just something as simple as like the love of your mother or the love of your family? What would it take for you to do a 180-degree switch to turn on that now?
All right.
That's essentially what happened to Saul. So it had to be something crazy. So again, from looking at it from the faith standpoint, it makes sense evidentially. I think that's a word. It makes sense based off the evidence, if that's not a word. That Saul would, this was within a day that he changed his whole mantra for his life, which was like, like I said, anything that you care about, whether it's sports or music.
Something profound has to be.
You'd have to. It would take a lot. It would take like an act of God, for most people to shift and then turn against that, which he does. So that's very important. And not only think about it, but think of the worst skeptic of Christianity nowadays, and that's essentially who Saul was, or who Paul was. So those two things. So it's like the guy, with his nose up, and he's like, "Oh no, bro, no, that's wrong.
Yeah.
There's no evidence."
Yeah, and funny thing now, look at it, it's people who don't believe in God.
Yeah.
Because now Jews and Christians, we don't tussle like that no more.
Right.
Now it's, if anything, it's Jews Christianity and Islam, or Christianity and atheists.
And atheists,
You know,
both, yeah.
And back in the day,
You know what's
you know,
weird,
it
though?
was Christians and Jewish people. They were the ones, you know, and even the Roman Empire, though, which they weren't atheists because they had their own gods, but they, you know, there were some other.
Eventually, they did adopt Christianity.
Right,
But
that was the fall.
yeah.
of the Roman Empire, baby.
But okay, so that was basically the conversion of Skull, which again is the biggest skeptic, did a 180 degrees and became someone who not only was a believer but went to write 13 books of the Bible that we now read today. So the next point is
James,
Yeah, James.
which is I think there are more than one James in the Bible. I don't know, but this
a good
James is
name.
referring to
it's a good name.
Jesus' brother, which was, you know, probably the youngest brother.
Right.
He was younger than Jesus, but even if he was younger, imagine growing up with your brother, and then, you know, he's saying that I'm basically God's
He
son.
said, I'm God's son.
Okay.
So James, yeah,
And then
definitely very important. And he basically thought Jesus was a loon, and you can kind of see that among brothers nowadays, or siblings nowadays, where they kind of have like their disagreements and stuff a lot of times. And he was the same way with Jesus. He was like, "Oh yeah, my brother's just like a freaking crazy person who thinks he's God's son, and the Romans are about to kill him." But
yeah, and it wasn't until the resurrection that James started.
he probably felt bad.
Yeah, maybe he was like, "Oh crap."
It's like, I'm sorry.
So yeah,
Good old James was
good old James.
thought he was crazy, and then, like a lot of times happens, and James is a good analogy where it's like, oh no, Jesus wasn't the Son of God, because a lot of people say that nowadays, and it took that resurrection for him to become a follower. But afterwards, he was probably like, oh dang, I'm sorry. So don't be like James. God always, uses examples like that. So,
And then my personal fascination out of all these topics is the early church. That's the one that I really like the most, because it makes, for me, like, I know, like, even all this is more like probably
Speculation?
factual, like with
oh
Jesus.
no, that's not speculative. Okay, yeah, factual.
Yeah, and then but this one's more like, because we see the effects today. That's the thing, which is the early church.
And it's kind of subliminal. I like to put that in there.
Right.
Or it's kind of like an underlying where you can see it if you look, but if you decide not to see it, you don't have to either. But it is definitely there.
Like how Christianity became worldwide. But
Yeah.
so after the crucifixion, the Christian followers, they weren't called Christians at the time. They got that name later. But Christians at the time were being prosecuted, not only by the Jewish authorities, but a little bit later down the line, the Roman authorities. And so they went into hiding. They were scared for their lives. But then all of a sudden, bam, they started going out four corners out of nowhere, preaching the gospel, willing to risk their lives, and many of them did lose their lives for the cause.
Let me say, I got back from Mexico about 2 weeks ago. I think it was a little longer.
We'll link it.
And this is a crazy thing to see whenever people have that belief in God so much that they are willing to risk their lives, because there's some places like San Juan Chamula where it's just real dangerous, and you pretty much, it's on the Voice of the Martyrs. I think it's one of the only place of two on this side of the world that's in red as very dangerous. And the people that I was working with, they were gonna go to the villages out there where they're pretty much essentially ready to die, and just to see that in person, see people ready to die, but let's not say kill other people, but just die for their faith is definitely really crazy. And for the disciples to to do this, it definitely would have to have been a miracle to convince them
Right.
because if Jesus just died, that would have been it. Essentially, most if not all disciples died for their faith, and it would have took something pretty crazy because it's kind of the same thing where it's like one person dying is something, but when you have a lot of people dying, and there's not really any benefit to them other than
Right.
what was the benefit? Dying. That's not really a
Right.
benefit. So
And
that had to
even
be-
if like the secondhand, like the secondhand experiences, not people not seeing Jesus face to face, but yet in Nero's time, they would light Christians up in the in the halls of the
yeah.
streets, just for just for believing in Christ, and a lot of them they didn't see Jesus face to face, but they had their own personal interaction with them through their heart, and
Yeah. And that has an effect
yeah,
too.
even today you see that Holy Spirit living in us.
Yep. Oh, and it's significant too. All the prophecies, and well, I'll look for these, but I'll send Ethan the links for these of saying all basically the things that were gonna happen to God. He was gonna be born, and we're shooting this next to Christmas. It'll probably come out after Christmas, but it's 3 days before Christmas. About his birth, Isaiah, Ezekiel, all the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, and his whole life, and
Prophecy fulfilled one after another. Jesus' birth alone, man, fulfilled.
And the thing is,
Oh,
too, the
man.
Old Testament is dated way, way before the fact that or Jesus being alive and everything, and those prophecies were in there. So all that stuff,
And you have to remember too that the Old Testament was the Jewish
right?
text, and so
And Judaism believed
Yeah.
different than Christian.
Christianity wouldn't have had if they were essentially made by Christian, or if it was just like a Looney Tune thing,
Right.
why is there so many prophecies fulfilled
Yeah,
from a Jewish text?
yeah.
know what I mean?
And why a lot of Jewish people don't believe. I know that I heard a conservative commentator named Ben Shapiro, if you want to look him up, but he was just talking about that they don't believe, even though the Mosaic Law does talk about the Savior coming, they don't believe it was Jesus because they don't think, I don't know, I guess that God would come in human form at that soon, even though he fulfilled a lot of prophecies and stuff. And we might try to look it up and just elaborate more at a later date. If y'all want us to, let us know for sure. But basically, yeah, and that dude's real smart. If you look at his stuff, talking about politics and stuff, so he definitely has a very good reason because he doesn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. But I attribute it personally to just conditioning because you grew up your parents' religion, and if you're smart as a young kid and you know your parents are good, you can kind of condition yourself and treat yourself into believing that justifying certain things. And like I said, we weren't there, so I would attribute it to that. And I do think that I think at the same time that we're all one big family, and as long as he believes in God, that we'll all go to heaven. The same.
Because I think, if I remember correctly, reading that Jewish, during the second coming, the Jewish nation will get a second chance.
Yeah,
And so basically, he's not going to lose any of his people.
that's a
I
good
don't
one.
think. Yeah, so
We'll do
even if they don't believe now, they will eventually.
yeah,
So-
and we have Revelations. I'm looking for it. Yeah, we have Revelations, and we're gonna talk about all the stuff that has taken place in the last book of the Bible that was prophesied, and all the stuff that's yet to come, and how it's all lining up.
Right.
So that'll be a good one too. Stay tuned for that. But it is gonna be a little like crazy and scary. I mean, it's not like scary. Like a
It's not scary
movie.
if you're not if you're a believer. It's not going to be scary. I'll tell you that.
If not, if you want to see demons literally physically running around on Earth,
If you want to see John the Baptist with a sword coming out of his head,
then it's pretty
like-
scary. But if you're a Christian, then no.
Or no, I
get
think
raptured
he shoots flame like.
out of his mouth. Yeah,
I don't know. It was one of them, but yeah, we'll talk about it.
Anyway, all the prophecies coming true, and Jesus also prophesied about it was going to take him 3 days to rise, and he prophesied that Peter was going to deny him 3 times, and he prophesied Judas would betray him. And this was all before the fact, and this was all recorded.
Not only did Jesus prophesy that, it was also prophesied in the Old
Yeah.
Testament that I think I don't know if it says exactly the amount. I think it does. I think it says like for like 30 silver that the Messiah will be betrayed. So
Yeah.
I don't know
So
more
and
like
then
that.
again, all those texts and like Dead Sea Scrolls is dated way before Jesus came, because like I said, those two things are not argued upon. The one thing I argue upon is Jesus' role. But if you look back at those ancient texts, the Old Testament, and you look at the prophecies, it again contributes to the fact that Jesus was who he said who he was. Because how else could he have done all the prophecies spot on, even like where he was born and stuff like that? And then there's a little speculation still, for whatever reason, about if the Bible translates. Um, and it does, because we have the old Hebrew Bibles, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have the Greek Bibles, and people speak all these languages fluently now, and they also speak English, and there's just too much crossover. So we would be able to know if anything were out of whack, and it would get fixed. So um, yeah, the translation of it's different than like Google Translate, where you just type it in. It's like these people actually speak, and like in one language you say the word amazing, but in this language it means like cool, and that's how you say it
Or even
differently.
like simply the whole like love in Greek. There's three different loves in Greek,
Yeah,
but in English there's only one word for
right.
love. So that whole just like simple verbiage like that. You
Yeah,
know,
but the ideas that get conveyed are the same, and the words are like again mostly the same. There is a little bit that gets lost, and I could recommend going to the Hebrew, and I guess you could probably put it into like some
if you
translator.
really
There's
want to,
probably
yeah.
there's probably like
But it will not make sense though.
yeah, there's probably
If
like
you try to read it word for word in Hebrew to or from English to
yeah.
Hebrew, it will not make sense at all.
I
But
would not recommend that. But this is what I was gonna say is like I bet you there's a website or something that essentially does the translation, and you might not trust that too. But what are you gonna do now? Learn Hebrew if you want to do it, right?
or even Greek if you need to.
Yeah, learn Greek and Hebrew, and then you can figure out exactly what it says. But like I said, there's people that do both of these, and they agree upon the idea. They agree upon the words used. That the message is still one. And I would like to point out too that there's definitely
Go ahead, keep talking. I'll cut it to you. I'll crop it. I'll crop me out.
well. All right. So basically, the Bible does not get lost in translation, and if you want to do the research on it, you definitely can. But there's people that already do it, and also from the divine standpoint, God's. If you believe in God, He definitely had His hand keeping the message the same for everyone, because there would be no point writing it. So if you have faith in God up to that point, then you better believe that He kept it the message for through the translation too. Um, and then the fact that there's so many other religions, evolution, a lot of times, like we were talking about, it gets replaced in the science books, but actually evolution, uh, as a replacement for creation, becomes a religion, because science is observable and you can replicate it. And going back into evolution, none of that stuff can be proven. It's all speculation. It is based off some fact, but it's still a speculation, just like how I speculate that there's a creator. It's the same exact thing. They just think that going back in time, that basically humans evolved from dirt into rocks, into animals, into humans with intelligence. And I believe that God created, and we believe that God created humans and we were intelligent. So it's definitely evolution. We're going to touch more on that, kind of along the lines of science, but because it's in science books, a lot of people confuse it with science. So don't get confused by evolution with science, because we're going to break it down very well, showing why Um, it isn't science after a certain extent. So yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much our base level of proof. We're gonna link all the stuff that we said.
Mm-hmm.
If you want us to go deeper, or we might decide it's necessary just on feedback, like people like it and stuff, we'll probably go deeper into it, and maybe a certain specific topic or whatever. The sky's the limit. We want to start getting guests on here too, so um, there'll be a lot of stuff, but hopefully that was a good, pretty convincing base level of why that Jesus was real and the Bible is true and it didn't get lost in translation, right?
Right. Well, that was episode 2 of Lion and Lamb.
Oh, yeah.
Until next time, shalom.
Gracias.